Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to my local area of Clackmannanshire in Scotland. Of course I've got the choice of two breweries here, but for this one we are going to go to Williams Brothers, who are from Alloa. And many of you watching from various countries around the world will have heard of these guys by now. They're getting pretty big. But this beer is called Stravaigan, and that is a Scottish verb for, it means to wander aimlessly or without intent, so it tells you that on the bottle there. But this beer is quite interesting because it's a collaboration with Stillwater Artisinal, who are a gypsy brewery and kind of based in Baltimore in Maryland. But the guy, Brian Strumke, who owns this brewery, likes to go around and brew with various different people around the world, and his beer has a really high rating on Rate Beer and BeerAdvocate.com, so he is definitely worth checking out. And I know Williams Brothers beer is of really good quality, and for them to collaborate with somebody who has such a good rating, I'm sure it will be a very interesting beer for us to try. But the guys in Valhalla Goat, who that shop is actually owned by Williams Brothers, that's in Glasgow, they told me that this beer is quite an interesting one. It's a Scottish croft ale, they describe it as, but it is kind of like a Saison, but it has some sour beer characteristic about it too. But there's a lot of various ingredients added to this one, which is a trademark of Stillwater Artisinal, of course. So what I can assure you with this beer review is that it is a very interesting beer that I'm about to review for you. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very brief history of the brewery. It will only be a minute or two long, but if you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery websites are in the video description for you below, along with links that will take you to my other reviews from both Stillwater Artisanal and from Williams Brothers. Hopefully I can add some from Stillwater in the fairly near future, and there's also a link down there to my new Facebook page as well, so do please go on there and like that for me, it's muchly appreciated. But anyway, to tell you about Williams Brothers first, as I've told you many a time, these guys started out with their family owned Glen Brew home brewing shop over in Glasgow, and their first ale, which many of you will have heard of, was inspired by a 17th century Gaelic recipe for the Freya Heather Ale, which of course is named after the Celtic mythological hero of the same name. So this beer came about in 1988 when a woman of Gaelic descent came into their brew shop with a translation from Gaelic into English for the recipe for this beer, and she wanted to create a batch of this to share with her family. And of course Scott Williams agreed to do this, or Bruce Williams, sorry, he agreed to do this in exchange for the recipe of the beer and the ability to use it commercially. So there's some sort of agreement in there that she gets as much of this beer as she wants, because this is what has really propelled Williams Brothers into the big time, if you like. But the first batch of this beer was brewed over in Argyll and Bute at Tainoak railway station, and it was only 5 barrels, but this beer proved so popular that they really had to upscale it. So Bruce was joined by his brother Scott Williams at this point, and they began to develop various other historic recipes such as the Groatsit, which is a gooseberry wheat ale, the Kelpie, the Ebalum, and the Alba, which is a Scots pine ale as well. So these 4 recipes were first brewed at the Craigmill brewery over in Stravaigan, which is now home to the Stravaigan ales. They brewed there between 1998 and 2004 for about 6 years. So in 2004 the company then relocated to their current base at the 4th brewery in Kellybank in Alloa, and this was when they adopted the name Williams Brothers Brewing Company. They were called Heather Ales before this. So since they've moved to Alloa, they've developed probably about 40 or 50 different new recipes, and they are probably one of the most prolific Scottish craft breweries these days. And like I told you at the start of the video, those of you watching in Canada, Australia, the Commonwealth countries, the Anglophone countries, and probably down in South America and maybe even South Africa and things like that, you will be starting to find Williams Brothers beer. These guys have got very big, and quite rightly, because their beer, in my opinion, really is pretty good. They're one of the best craft breweries in Scotland these days. And it's actually quite a shame, because Alloa and Clackmannanshire, where I'm from, is famous for the whisky bonds, and this is of course where the whisky matures. But these guys are the last brewery in Alloa, and this was the old brewing capital of Scotland. But when you've got a brewery as good as Williams Brothers, you can't really complain. But anyway, just a little bit about Stillwater Artisinal. So as I told you, this is a venture of a nomadic gypsy brewer called Brian Stillwater Strumke, and he's actually a native of Baltimore in Maryland. Quite a nice place actually, I've been over there. But he's a former world-renowned techno DJ and producer, and he quickly made himself well known in homebrewing circles in Maryland for his kind of unusual brewing methods and ingredients. He likes to use a lot of herbs and spices and wild yeast amongst other things in his beers. But he's actually been rated as one of the best newcomer brewers by RateBeer.com. I think this was back in 2011, and he's remained high up in the top 100 brewers in the world since then, both in 2012, 2013, and I think beyond then as well. But he now travels the world and does collaboration brews with various brewers from well-known breweries all across the world. So this is why I was telling you this beer should be a very interesting one for us to try. So just a little bit of date on the beer before we open it up. This guy is a 6.7% Saison beer according to Rate Beer. It's a Scotch Croft Ale though, like I told you, but it's hopped with Savinsky Goldings and Nelson Sauvin hops, and it's got a malt bill of Maris Otter, pale rye, malted oats and also malted wheat as well. And the additional ingredients to this beer are heather, bog myrtle, which I've no idea really what that is, gooseberries, and the yeasts used in this were actually the Stillwater, Saison and Farmhouse strains as well. So it should be quite an interesting beer. You've got a good balance there between Williams Brothers and Stillwater Artisinal, and apparently this beer was conditioned in the tanks for a year. But the interesting thing about this one is the guys in Valhalla Go, as I say, one of Williams Brothers' various businesses over in Glasgow, they told me that this beer had to they had to let it mature even in the bottle for a little bit. They said that it came out after sitting in the bottle for about 3 months. They said it tasted a lot better. So that's one thing to look out for. Those of you, if you find this beer in Australia and things like that, it probably will be just the right age. But if you buy it fresh, make sure and let it age in your cellar for a little bit, because apparently it does taste better according to the guys in the shop. So without further ado, let's get this guy open. I'll just let you have a little look at it before I actually open this beer up. So you can see there's the man on the horse, and it tells you just on the side there about Stravaigan. I'm not sure how well you can make that out, but it's quite nicely presented, this one actually. I'll definitely keep the bottle for this. You can see the kind of Celtic style art there, the guy on his horse, and on top there you can see the Williams Brothers Celtic symbol there. I'm not sure exactly how to get this one open, but we will just go for it. But this beer is best before August 2016. So I'll maybe just turn it round like this, just to cut the sort of foil, and then we'll crack it open. So that was easier than I thought it was going to be. But yeah, this guy is a 6.7% Scotch Croft Ale, but it's apparently more like a kind of interesting, quite infused Saison beer. So we'll see how we get on with this. But heather, bog myrtle and gooseberries in this one, which should make it quite an interesting beer. So yeah, let's just stick this guy back down there. But as you can see, this is poured a really quite clear golden colour, no sediment at all visible in this one. In fact, sorry, just a little few particles swirling around at the bottom of the beer there, but there's quite a bit of carbonation visible in it. As you can see, there's about a half finger of a frothy white head in there. That's going to fade away quite quickly and just become a very thin foamy layer, but it looks very, very nice. A lot of little bubbles visible in the carbonation, but very, very good looking beer, I have to say. It is transparent. If I put my fingers behind it there, you can see on the camera. Can't see my fingers too clearly, but you can see that it is transparent at least. But some big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a lot of little ones going up towards the bottom of the head, which is just fading away to be very thin and foamy now, like I said, and just a little bit of sediment floating around. So very attractive looking beer. So let's have a look at the smell of this one. Now that is quite interesting. It does smell like a Saison. You can smell some of the unusual elements in it. There's a definite presence of the heather there, and I don't know really how to describe that. That's something that you can really pick up on quite easily when you're Scottish, because all the hills, I come from quite a countryside place obviously, so we do get a lot of heather, and you can really, it's a very distinct aroma, particularly Scottish heather. I've even found it smells different from the American heather and things, but you can definitely smell that little bit of heather infusion in this one. It's a sort of peppery and spicy thing, but it's a little bit sweeter and more floral spice, peppery spice, if that makes sense. But with this one, you've got a definite kind of big bready and doughy yeasty nose to this. You can pick up the gooseberries coming out of this one too. I've never encountered bog myrtle before, so I'm really not sure if I am picking that up or not. I've no idea really what it would smell like. But you can definitely pick up the heather and the gooseberries, at least I can say that. But it's a big bready and doughy yeast character coming out of this one. There's a bit of wheaty character to it as well. That's also infusing with that kind of peppery, sort of slightly floral spice that you get from the heather. There's a nice little bit of banana, and you can pick up a bit of lemony citrus, and there's probably a bit of grassy hop coming out of this too, which is probably what you would expect from the Goldings. The Nelson Sauvin hops are usually quite fruity and quite grassy as well, so perhaps some of the citrusy character is from the Nelson Sauvin as well. But yeah, it smells really interesting. As I always say, just take a little bit of time with these beers and have a smell of them before you taste them, because it's always worth doing, and it helps train your sensory skills as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's get stuck in. So this is Stravaigan, which is a collaboration between Stillwater Artisinal, kind of from Baltimore in Maryland, and from Williams Brothers Brewery in Alloa and Clackmannanshire in Scotland. Slàinte. That's really quite interesting. It's not quite as sour. Nowhere near as sour as the guys in Williams Brothers told me this was going to be. Or the guys in Valhalla Goat, rather. Yeah, the sour character is really quite mild actually. You just get a little oily bubble on the front of your tongue there, and that's where some of the gooseberry flavours come out, and there's a little bit of a kind of a peary, citrusy flavour in there as well. It's just quite unusual, a very unusual beer, but it definitely fits in to the sort of Saison category. The other kind of unusual beer I remember I've had is a Norwegian farmhouse ale, which was Handbryggeriet, who were from over in Norway, and it actually reminds me a little bit of that beer in some regards. Obviously different flavours, but a similar idea and a similar feel actually. But yeah. So on this, what you'll notice when it first comes in, you're getting a lot of the gooseberry flavour coming out, and there is a kind of infusion of a slightly kind of lemony citrus in there, but quite a peary citrus. The lemon isn't too sharp. You're getting a kind of pear flavour mixing in with that, and you can definitely pick up these gooseberries right behind the very front of your tongue. You'll just get this little oily bubble, and it'll feel nice and wet, and that's where these kind of gooseberry and peary and slightly citrusy flavours are coming out. Around the edges of the tongue there, it's definitely a grassy hop, perhaps maybe slightly aromatic. It's got a bit of aromatic character just because of how dry the hoppiness actually is. But yeah, there's a good little bit of tartness to it as well, but it's nowhere near as sharp as a kind of beer that is intentionally sour, if that makes sense. This guy is just a nice kind of infusion, a very slight sour take on a Saison beer, if that makes sense. It's the flavours in this one blend together really quite beautifully actually. I was expecting this one to be very, very sharp and very tart and things, but it really isn't. It's just a nice blend of flavours, and that's what Williams Brothers are good at. They're good at making all these flavours just blend together really quite nicely. But yeah, once you get past that sort of slightly sourish characteristic at the start of the beer, it just becomes quite a nice, interesting Saison really. You've got a kind of bready and doughy yeasty blanket across the tongue there. And it's a little bit spicy there too. You've got some nice heather. It's got a quite nice heather infused taste. That comes out a little bit more in the aftertaste actually. Just as your tongue starts to dry off, you'll pick up just this little slightly florally spice character, and it moves out towards the edges of the tongue there, but it's just interesting because that floral character is in the middle of the palate rather than at the sides where you would expect it from the hoppiness. It's actually coming from the malt base. And if it's filtered, I'm not sure if they would have added heather to the brew, but if it's filtered, that would kind of give you the interesting colour of the beer, because when you filter whiskey, I'm sure when you filter whiskey through heather, it gives you a bit of a lighter and more kind of yellowish, richer colour, if that makes sense. But they might have added it to the brew and just left it, but that probably has the same effect as filtering it through. But yeah, definitely quite an interesting one this. That heathery character in the middle of the palate really is something quite unusual, so do pay attention to that. And those gooseberry and peary and slightly citrusy flavours at the front of the tongue are interesting too, but it's a nice big bready and doughy yeast, and it's a little bit spicy from that heathery character too, and there is a little bit of a cereally component to it, but it's very mild and not quite spicy as you would get from some of these kind of English real ales or some of the golden ales or something where they put cereal in to make it a kind of intentionally spicy beer. It just blends together really well, and as you move into the aftertaste you can get a little bit more of the oaty character coming out of this one. So there's quite a lot going on in the palate of this beer. It really is one of the more interesting ones I've had from Williams Brothers. It's not to say that the other beers aren't interesting. They're very, very good flavours, but this one makes you think a little bit more, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's really interesting. It has a good little bit of kind of sour beer characteristic, but then that just gives way to a very nice and really quite drinkable Saison, if that yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it, I would say. A kind of nice sour start to it, but then moves into a nice bready, doughy and kind of heathery infused Saison there, which is kind of typically Scottish thing to be. So in terms of the mouthfeel of this one, I would say it probably is quite light-bodied actually, maybe pushing the mid-body just because of the bready and doughy character in the beer. But there's a big malty presence in this one. It starts off kind of sour, like I say, and quite wet in the mouthfeel, but then it dries out a little bit more. Around the edges of the palate you're getting the sort of grassy, hoppy character. That just dries out there. On the front of the tongue as well, it is a little bit dry and a little bit florally and slightly citrusy character. Those pear and gooseberry flavours just sitting there. But the lasting flavours in this one really are the kind of slightly heathery, spiced, bready and yeasty character. So that's the real mouthfeel you're getting from this. It's quite dry at the very front of the palate, but it's a bit wetter around the sides and perhaps even dry into the middle as well. So it's quite an interesting beer, this one. As I say, it really does test your palate, but if you like, for example, perhaps a beer you will have come across is that one I mentioned from Handbryggeriet in Norway, the Norwegian Wood. If you like unusual beers that are very traditional and very old styles, then this is one to go for. And indeed, go and check out the likes of the Eberlum, the Scots Pine Ale, the Grootset and the Kelpie and all of these things. Go and check out these from Williams Brothers, because this is what they're really famous for. But as I say, this was my very first encounter with Stillwater Artisinal, and those kind of infused flavours that they're adding into the beer make it quite interesting, and it's always interesting to test your palate like these things, with these things, as I say. So hopefully I can check out some more Stillwater beers in the fairly near future for you. But anyway, thanks again for watching my beer reviews. As I say, if you like unusual ones that will test your palate, then this is one to go for, and Williams Brothers are a good brewery for that, so do check them out. If you have tried this beer before, please let me know in the comments section below your own thoughts on it. It's always interesting to read them, but a really interesting beer, typically Scottish because of the gooseberries and because of the heather element, and a really interesting component to the flavour. But yeah, let me know your own thoughts on it. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Go and like my Facebook page, and I will catch you with my next beer review. There will be more from Williams Brothers and hopefully from Stillwater Artisinal. Slàinte for now.